a little bit like you walk into a bookstore and they're trying to tell you how to live a good life or be your best or whatever. And there's one side of the aisle which is positive thinking and be nice to yourself, do all these exercises, blah, blah, blah. And then there's another side of the aisle which is David Goggins, grind it out, embrace the suck, blah, 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 right? And these two they basically fight against each other. They're not the same thing. But in reality, you need both. Particularly in high performance spaces, you need to be able to handle your emotions and not allow discomfort to distract you from what you're doing. And you also need to make sure that you're managing your well-being and staying as optimistic as possible. Not positive, but optimistic, because people get confused within positive psychology. It's not about positive, it's about optimism, right?
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson, and whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode has worked with elite military personnel, World Cup soccer, the National Football League, WNBA champions, Major League Baseball, and high performance in the finance and business industry all across the globe. I've been working to have him on the podcast just about since this podcast started, so I'm excited to welcome finally to the Elev8 Podcast, Paddy Steinfort.
Morning, Tyler. Good to be here. Thanks for having me, and I am great.
Good. I know I've been bugging you a long time to have you on. I think you're one of the best in the game when it comes to performance. So excited to have you share a little bit. I guess to start, for those might know a little bit less, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about kind of your transition from being a professional athlete to the performance work you do now with some of the best in the world.
Yeah, sure. As listeners will hear or watchers will hear, my accent suggests I'm not from around these parts. I do live in Brooklyn, New York these days, but I grew up in Australia, and in Australia, the biggest sport there, the same way NFL is the biggest sport in America, we have our own football that no one else plays. And I was lucky enough to be 6'6" and mildly athletic enough to actually get drafted. I was drafted in the first round of the team that I rooted for as a kid, so I thought all my dreams would come true. And then turns out the dream became a bit of a nightmare. I'm saying that with tongue in cheek, obviously. It wasn't terrible to be a professional athlete, but it definitely didn't play out the way that I'd seen it playing out and the way that my draft status suggested it should. So I had as many surgeries as I had years in the game. I left after 7 years and surgeries, and was in the wilderness for a little bit trying to work out what to do, and got called back to coaching, as in like my heart called me back to coaching because I missed the game. And then in order to be a coach, a better coach, I came to America every off season to like visit teams, and occasionally I would visit some universities because I felt like psychology was the important missing piece or the vital ingredient of a great coach. And one thing led to another, and I ended up getting accepted into University of Pennsylvania for their masters in pos psych. And at the same time as I got accepted, the head coach that I was working for in Australia got fired, and I got a buyout. So it kind of, stars aligned, and I came over here thinking I'd be here for a year or two, and then head back and get another job in AFL, is the name of our football. And I've never left. It's now 11 years later, perhaps, and I've been through MLB, NBA, NFL. I've been to a couple of FIFA World Cups, and now because of some of the names of some of the people I've worked with, had a bit of press and was lucky enough to get approached by people in finance and medicine and law. So effectively, I describe myself as a pressure coach now more than a mental performance coach, because all of the people I work with, regardless of their arena, deal with a lot of pressure in their lives, both in the moment pressure and also cumulative over time.
Sure. For those that also don't know, tell them how big an Australian football field is.
Yeah, okay, I'll put it into context. I used to, thankfully, I can just show videos right now. So if you search on YouTube AFL Aussie Footy, you'll find plenty of videos.
Yeah.
But it's a very unique game. It's kind of a mix of NFL because we catch the ball with our hands, and the play stops after you get a good catch. Um, we kick it like soccer. It's full contact with no pads like rugby, and there's no offsides. So it's kind of like, I guess, hockey. I don't know what other sport I can compare that to, but and then you take all those ingredients and put them together with 18 people on each team on the field at one time. And that sounds crazy until you realize the field is twice as wide as an American football field. So
Yeah.
it's around about 150 to 200 meters. I don't know what that converts to in yards, but you'll see when the Rams play the Niners, I think in the season opener this year, it's
Yeah.
in Melbourne at the field that I used to play. That was my home ground
Okay.
when I played. And you'll see the NFL field will look a little tiny in the middle of this big oval before the 100,000 people stands as well.
Wow, for sure. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about, I think, is an article almost 8 years ago you wrote called The Inner Game. You're talking about the balance of mental health and high performance and some of the pressures that come with sport. How do you see those challenges showing up in kind of the pressure environments at college and pro athletics now, and how people are doing their best to manage and perform at their best?
Yeah, I don't know if the incidences, that if you were sitting in a psychiatrist's office or going through their notes, which you're not allowed to do, but if you actually had the data, I don't know if the actual number of instances and cases of mental illness would have changed. It's just probably a little more spoken about,
Hmm.
potentially not enough, but also in some cases too much because there is a little bit like a pendulum. It goes from one end where you're not allowed to talk about it, grit your teeth and get through it. You're just feeling a bit sad, which can happen when you're 0 for 30 and you're on a 10-game losing streak. Um, but then it swings the other way, and everyone's like, "Oh, we need to look after mental health," which absolutely, that's half the reason I went into psychology. But at the same time, it then gets treated with kid gloves and like a stand, or don't touch it, don't say anything, leave it alone. Let's let them work it out themselves, or let them talk to their uncle who is a performance coach. And I think that's actually one of the most dangerous things that has happened. As it's great that there's more discussion and dialogue around it, but I was adamant from day dot once I in my first mental performance job, which was at the Philadelphia Eagles and then the Toronto Blue Jays. In both instances, I was like, they hired me to cover everything, and I was like, hey, just so you know, if I spot something where I think there's a mental health condition that is coexisting alongside some performance frustration, I ain't touching that. I'm not both qualified, nor is it fair on the individual to mix those two things up,
Sure.
right? There is you can have two coexisting conditions the same way you can have a sore back and a sore hamstring. You can have, an attention issue where I can't concentrate, and at the same time, I can have a biological imbalance that leads me to have um, a low serotonin concentration, and all of a sudden, I just have no mood and I can't be bothered doing anything. So it's a really intricate space, but it is great. There is more awareness. At the same time, I think it's still a growing understanding and education space where people
Yeah.
can differentiate between what's frustration and what's actually a dysfunction.
Sure. You mentioned kind of the serotonin there. I believe I don't know if it's the same article you talked about the unknown heroes, the hormones of high performance. Can you talk about some of the things that we want going right when we see high performance and some of the things we want to try to not have boiling up in our system?
Yeah, I talk about three in particular. There's four, and serotonin is kind of like the little cousin at the end of the line that is fantastic to have. Like we definitely don't want to run short of that. Life is shit without it. Sorry, can I
Yeah,
swear on here? All right,
yeah,
good, good. Um, but as a domino effect, it actually all starts with cortisol, and people probably first come across cortisol as the stress hormone, but in reality, it actually has its biggest and most outsized action when pressure is present, which is different from stress. Stress is when the load is too much. It's actually physiologically and mentally very taxing, and so I do get stressed, and cortisol is released as part of that, along with adrenaline and noradrenaline, or norepinephrine, depending on what continent you're from. But cortisol actually shows a larger spike when things flip into, okay, there's a threat here. So it's not just this is hard, it's I might actually die, which some of my clients have that, or some, the patient might die, or my wingman might die in the Air Force or Navy. But then there's also identity death. I might die if I miss this free throw. Like the idea of me being the cool, calm, collected baller that I've presented and everyone knows me as, that guy dies if I don't get it done today. And so the same physiological reaction kicks off inside us. You can't actually change it. Even one of the best tests that they invented maybe 30 odd years ago to reproduce reliably this kind of cortisol spike that pumps under pressure is just a simple job interview. And just going up there and being asked to speak English and do basic math is as threatening to our identity as some of these other high performance areas, because if I can't speak English and I can't do like 7+7, then am I valuable for anything? Like, and so all of a sudden my tribe, maybe I don't belong in the tribe. Maybe I get kicked out. So evolutionarily, that was when cortisol would spark right up, because it's both part of the accelerator that happens in fight or flight, but it's more important and more prevalent in the mix when the brake hits. And this is the bit that's supposed to slow us down, but usually they're both running at the same time. And if you've ever driven a car and you've had the brake and the accelerator on at the same time, it doesn't work, right? Yeah. And so that's number one. That then leads to two other hormones becoming a little too prevalent in the brain. One being dopamine, which we know as the pleasure chemical, but again, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it doesn't actually fire in response to getting pleasure. It's an anticipation of pleasure, right? And so cortisol stops the clearing of these two hormones, one being dopamine and the other being norepinephrine, which is the essentially something that amps up how strongly you balance your emotion, right? And so the two features of being sped up under pressure is that I keep jumping from thing to thing, trying to get this solution solved, which is dopamine running in overdrive, and norepinephrine, which is weighing emotional stuff way heavier. So all of a sudden our balanced objective thinking goes away, because either the newest, shiniest thing or no, I'm so committed to this plan, these become outsized and outweighted in our decision-making, weighing up of should I go left or go right. So all in all, that cocktail leads to, this is the knock-on effect under pressure. And usually if this is sustained, we get kind of an imbalance where this becomes like, all right, I'm just going to stay in this mode. Like, this is just how I'm going to run, which leads to the depletion of serotonin and the eventual effects of what is some propose as the link between burnout or post-traumatic stress and actual mental illnesses. That's the simplest and dumbest way that I can possibly describe that. I apologize to any neuroscientists who are listening.
No, we like to try to make it, as palatable. No, that was fantastic. What are some of the things you see in your work sometimes when it comes to maybe the resistance or to adoption or practices of positive psychology in some high stress environments? I know often, the way we used to do things, it's not the way we used to, some of those things, but what are some of the things that you see get in the way of people applying some of the beneficial things they can get from it?
I usually tell a story to answer that question, and if you don't mind, I'll jump into that. In my first gig at the Eagles, Like I'm an NFL fan for decades. All of a sudden, I'm in an NFL locker room. I'm in the lecture theatre. I'm up front, and I'm like, oh shit! I've got all this great positive psychology stuff that I think buffers you from stress and makes you bring your best person to the field. And so I start teaching it. We run an exercise where it's a cognitive behavioral therapy exercise, essentially, initially, and you follow the thought cycle all the way around and find a place where you can cut it off, where you start talking to yourself about, shit, I fumbled the ball, and so that's okay. I don't normally fumble it, and oh my God, maybe my position's in jeopardy, and what's the coach going to say, and how's it going to affect my contract? And round we go. And you're supposed to find the spot where you can pause and reset and go back to your routine. And I give this to the whole team, and so it's training camp. There might have been 80 in the room at that point. I can't remember the exact number, but everyone's generally amusing me, so seeing where it'll go. And there's one player who just doesn't do it, just kind of sits there. He writes one line and then he just sits there. And it happens to be DeMarco Murray, who the year before was the NFL's leading rusher. He'd just come to Philly on a massive contract. And I'm in my head, I'm like, this guy's trying to show me who the big dog is, and he doesn't need this, blah, blah, blah. So I decide I'm going to lean in. I go over to DeMarco and I look over his shoulder. I'm like, hey man, do you understand the question? He's like, yeah, I got you. And I would, so, what's happening here? Because you've only got one thing written. He goes, well, this is what I do. Him saying to me, this is just how it works. This is how I became the best rusher in the world. And the more I worked in these spaces where I was working with the best in the world, whether it was NFL, MLB, I was doing some resilience training with the US Army at that point, and it kept coming up that the best operators would call bullshit occasionally and just be like, that's not what I do. Like, I'm the best, and this is how I operate. This is how I get the $1 million contract. This is how I land the last minute play. This is how I save my buddy's life when we're in Fallujah. Like, I appreciate what you're trying to do with this positive thinking, but that's not reality sometimes. And so that leads to a bit of a rejection from some people, because they look at it as, well, I can't square that circle, right? I like what you're trying to do, but that's not reality for us in the space where if I screw up right now, I can't go back and redo that. I can't think my way out of it. The more I think and the more I focus on my feelings, the less I'm focused on my job. So that's part of it. And then there's also the cultural part of, well, it's kind of the secondary flow-on effect of that, of the best always just get on with it. They never cried, right? There's no crying in baseball. And so that to me is probably the biggest barrier, is that we don't acknowledge within positive psychology that this is a sometimes thing. Yeah. This is a right place, right time. Like, I refer to it as a little bit like you walk into a bookstore and they're trying to tell you how to live a good life or be your best or whatever. And there's one side of the aisle which is positive thinking and, be nice to yourself, do all these exercises, blah, blah, blah. And then there's another side of the aisle which is David Goggins, grind it out, embrace the suck, blah, 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 right? And these two they basically fight against each other. They're not the same thing. But in reality, you need both. Particularly in high performance spaces, you need to be able to handle your emotions and not allow discomfort to distract you from what you're doing. And you also need to make sure that you're managing your well-being and staying as optimistic as possible. Not positive, but optimistic, because people get confused within positive psychology. It's not about positive. It's about optimism, right? Yeah. And so I talk about those two sides of the same coin being your path to 3D thinking is the term I use, where one of them is rose-colored glasses, great. But if all I do is look at life through those, I don't get any depth. I don't see the full reality. And the other is the blue lens, the cool lens, everything, no emotion. But when you look through both at the same time, or you can switch in real time, then you can see the playing field, the job, the office, the relationship in as much detail and depth as possible. And you can work through it more accurately and more efficiently.
Love it. One of the things I remember I learned years ago, I think you shared it, was research from Kelly McGonigal on willpower, but talked about how willpower improves with support and compassion for team members. When high performance can feel very isolating, how can that role of support and compassion help us in sport?
Yeah, I think the underlying element of that being the way that it can help with high performance or willpower being increased with support from your teammates is really the generation of an environment where there is some form of psychological safety, and not psychological safety as in, oh, we're gonna look after all your feelings and you can feel how you want to feel and we're going to let you just stay there. It's the ability to realize that I can say how I actually am, and this person is connected so well that they know that I'm not feeling good, so they're not going to push me in a way that's going to upset that. But they also know my goals at the same time. Like, I'm not here in a high performance thing just to travel around the country and go to different stadiums. I'm here because I want to have a career in sport or whatever it might be, that another high performance arena, whether it's finance, law, medicine. And being connected to teammates means that we have some sense of two things: one, safety or connectedness, and two, having a bit more meaning than just it's about me. Because if it's just about me, eventually the pain can be like, yeah, I'm done. That's enough.
Yeah.
I don't need to do this anymore. Versus, the Viktor Frankl quote of, those who have the most to live for lasted longest. That's not a quote. That's a summary of his quote. They lasted the longest as prisoners of war, right? When they had a why beyond themselves, they could endure the suffering longer. And so that's my theory. I don't think it's been proven, but that's my theory on why that is such an important part of willpower, particularly within high performance environments.
Sure. Uh, One of the things I remember, I think one of the first times I learned about you was in an article about you in Sports Illustrated. And you looked really cool sitting in that photo, I remember. But
Don't, please, listeners and viewers, don't Google it because the photo is horrendous. I did a bit of backstory on that. I had done the interview. It had been like a few months in making because they spoke to a few different athletes around the place. And I had left at that. Then COVID hit, and I like shaved my head for shits and giggles because we're on Zoom. I'm working with an NBA team at that point. I thought it'd be funny and lift everyone's emotions. Plus, I'm not going to see anyone for a little bit, right? I'm in my apartment.
yeah.
And literally the day after I shaved my head, they're like, "Hey, we want to send a photographer to you. You're going to be a daily cover feature." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm going to be on the daily cover of Sports Illustrated and I'm going to look like Mr. Egghead." So, sometimes timing is everything.
Well, appreciate the backstory. One of the things you talked about, kind of the techniques and some of the tactics that you use, and I think just in coaching, talked about the importance of having trust with our athletes. How can we be more intentional about developing trust with our athletes?
Yeah, I don't know if this is in that article. I think I've written it somewhere else, or at least I said it in another interview. Um, I was taught early on by a couple of people back in Australia, Ray McLean and Craig Grime. Shout out to those two if they're followers of your podcast. That trust is built on three C's. I think Stephen Covey says two C's: character and competence. But in reality, the most important is the third C, which is consistency. I can trust Tyler, and this is, shout out to you for eventually getting me on here, because you asked me at some stage and I was like, yeah, no worries. And then life gets in the way. But you've been doggedly consistent at popping up occasionally and being like, hey, how's the next month look? How's the next month look? And to me, that's a sign of someone, that is an important sign of someone you can trust, because they don't just do it and then be like, oh, well, whatever, too hard. Your character and your commitment to making this show as good as you can make it is also lined up with your consistency. It's a silly example, but it's the one that sprung to mind right now. And if you think about the people that you trust in life, may not be the people closest to you, because Sometimes we love people who aren't that trustworthy, or we work with people who aren't that trustworthy. But if you actually ranked who's the person I trust the most, there would be three things from your point of view. They have a character that you admire and that you want in and around your circle. They're good at whatever it is that they bring to you, whether it's they're a good conversationalist or they're a good parent, they help me get through school, or they're a good teacher, or they're a good whatever it is. And that those two things are usually there, I can rely on it. Because if they're really good at playing quarterback and they're a great dude, but every third game they shit the bed, like I can't trust them as a quarterback.
Yeah.
Right? And so there actually needs to be those three things together within the context of whatever you're trusting that person with.
Yeah. Speaking of quarterbacks, you crossed paths with Patrick Mahomes when he was in college. What was there things that stood out about his abilities or desires than other college athletes?
Yeah, I think what stood out, I think I said it in that Sports Illustrated piece, what stood out with Patrick from day dot, so I worked with him over the course of 3 seasons, and the position group leaders, all of the guys in that team. Patrick was one of 8 or so that I'd meet every month. And the thing that stood out about Patrick is he never missed an appointment. He was never too cool to do the work. He was incredibly open and honest and willing to dive in. And if he truly believed that something was going to help, bang, he was on it. We went through a couple of exercises that were probably, other guys either couldn't intellectually get their head around, or maybe they could, but they didn't want to go be that vulnerable. And Pat was just, yeah, let's go, and said some things that I was like, wow, he actually said that to me, right? And at the same time, he is incredibly physically gifted, right? So
Sure.
you could have that in a package of a guy who I'd want to marry my sister. My sister's married, but if back in the day she wasn't, Patrick has a character that is like speaking of the 3 C's, character, competence, and consistency. That guy has it in spades. And that includes off the field. It includes the work that people don't see. It includes being a good supporter of his teammates. And that to me was the biggest thing that stood out. I know that Cliff Kingsbury, who was the head coach of Texas Tech at that point, said to me when I first arrived, he wasn't the starter. Davis Webb was, who I think is a GM or a coach somewhere at the moment. And he said, you're going to do the position leader of every group, but the quarterbacks I want you to do too, because Davis is our starter right now, but Patrick's got something about him. There's just the guys gravitate to him, but he also is very smart. He sees things unfold, and he's got a rocket of an arm. So, there were physical elements there as well as his character that made him really stand out.
That's awesome. I think in that same article, I remember this because I remember while I was learning the end of my college football career, I probably wasn't going to the NFL. I wanted to get into sports business at the time. And I remember we'd go out to, stadiums, and I'd see the advertisers, and I would look at the signs and be like, be curious on the sponsorships and that kind of thing. But in that article you talk about, I think it was with the athlete TJ McConnell, that kind of having some, stresses. And there's this tool that you gave them about just, hey, look at the signs around the stadium. Can you talk about how sometimes something so simple can help give us a little shift that we need in our mindset?
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because I'm writing a book at the moment, and in order to make it a good book and a reliable book, I went to find the science behind some of the stuff that I kind of did intuitively, right? And I found a researcher who did a good decade's worth of work on a thing called attention training technique, ATT. Now, when I spoke to him, he's like, "Oh, it's a shame, that you're calling now because no one's done anything on that for a decade and a half." But while we were doing it, I thought it was really important. And he actually referenced the TJ McConnell line in the article as well, because he goes, "Did you know the ATT? Because that's exactly what it is." And I said, "No, I just kind of made that up on the spot," knowing the core of a lot of what I teach in terms of managing your mind is based on the way our brains are structured and the way it operates. And Patrick actually referenced this in an article before, I think, his second Super Bowl. Someone asked him, "How do you focus?" And he mentioned our work from 7 years earlier. And he said, the one thing that stood out is that he talks about you can only have a few things on your mind at once. And that means if I'm thinking about the crowd and blah, 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 I'm not thinking about are they running a nickel coverage and the things you have to think about as a quarterback.
Right.
And, that's based, I didn't think at the time as I told him that in the back rooms of Texas Tech that it was a really important thing. But once he said that, I was like, wow, that's interesting that he remembered that. And then I realized a lot of my work was built on it. Our working memory, I'll give a quick breakdown here. What they call our working memory, which is not, hey, I remember the time I was 6 and I was doing this. Not long-term memory, not what we cram when we're doing exams, but our working memory is kind of like transient, like the RAM of your computer or your phone, right? I'm using this to do this exercise or to hold this piece of information. And then once I'm done with it, it just flushes out and it's replaced by something else.
Yeah.
Most studies, depending on where you're looking, say that humans can have between 4 to 6 things in their working memory at once, or let's say chunks, because some people get good at cramming a few things into one of those chunks, which means that right now, if I'm talking to you, you're hearing my voice. If you're watching me touch my fingers as I count through the things. You're nodding a little bit, being like, all right, this sounds accurate at the moment. He's done 3 things that I am doing. You might be thinking about what's coming up for lunch. And maybe you're thinking about how much longer are the interviews going, but you're not thinking about your left foot. And now that I've mentioned your left foot, one of those other 5 things got bumped out. And once we know that that's how our brain works, it's a limitation, but it's actually, it's kind of a bug, but it's actually a feature. Because when I know that I can only have a few things, I can be deliberate about filling it up with whatever I want to get rid of things that I don't want. So when TJ is having a bit of a moment before he goes out on the court in San Antonio, he comes to me. He's like, "Oh, I just got told I'm starting. This is a little bit much." And we sit down, and so I point up to the signs. Thankfully, there's a lot of banners in San Antonio, so we weren't lacking of things to look at. And I said, "Tell me the first letter on the first sign." He says C. And then tell me the second letter, H. Third letter, A. And the more we worked through that, eventually saying champions, whatever year it was, and blah, blah, blah. By the time we get to the second or third word, because we've gone one letter at a time, he's just loading a letter in, and then he's putting the next letter in, and eventually it's just letters and just what he can see as shapes on the roof. And he described it, I think his term in that article was, he said it kind of got me in this zen. It was weird, but it worked. Right. And that's all we're looking for at that time, is not anything I'd love it to last, but in reality, some people are wired a certain way. And so it's a really useful hack to know that if I fill my mind up, my current attention with 5 things that I can see, I can't spend attention on my emotions. And so if I do that for long enough, my emotions just get quiet. Likewise, if there's someone I'm in the batter's box and someone keeps saying shit to me, or they're talking trash while I'm at the free throw line, if I want to get rid of that sound, I either tune into other sounds really deliberately, the squeak, the sound of my shoes, the bouncing of the ball, whatever it might be, or I tune into my vision, or I tune into how my foot feels in my left cleat and the sock and blah, 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 right? So it's a simple exercise. It sounds way too easy and way too simple, but it is incredibly effective. And thankfully, I discovered it's actually based on validated research. So I'm happy to share it.
Because when I heard it, I was like, maybe I was calming myself and I didn't know it. I was just
No
kind of
doubt.
getting out of my own way a little bit.
No doubt.
Um, 2 more questions. You've got the Toughness podcast. I'll link that up here. I know people can find that. Tell us a little bit about that and what you like to do through that podcast.
Yeah, I mean, that was a collaboration with the US Army that actually also, that came up during COVID. I was on the US Army High Performance Advisory Board, and we were trying to think of ways to give value to people while everyone was doing it tough in COVID, locked away wherever. And I had a couple of speeches saved from my guest speakers that we would bring into the 76ers. I offered to share it, so we did. And they were like, "That's great. Can you do more?" So eventually I just started calling my Rolodex and saying, "Hey, can you come on? Like, we're just going to chat. It's for the soldiers, for the veterans." And we talked about, what stress and pressure looks like while you're having success. Can't remember the actual tagline, but that ran for about a year. They're all online. If you search me on YouTube, you'll find it. But it was a great project that eventually became a little bit too much because once COVID cleared up and I was back on the road again, it was very hard to keep together. And the Army was also back doing the Army things. So it was a short-lived thing. Thankfully, that led to, a couple of other connections that when you say, what do I like to do? We're going to be reinvigorating that channel shortly with a lot more content because it's supporting, I've got a couple of sponsors to help get content out that is related to the book that will eventually land sometime next year. So I'll share that when it's time.
Well, one other question I wanted to ask you before our last one is, I know you travel a lot, supporting your teams around the globe. What are a couple of your travel hacks that help you stay on top of your game when jet lag, fatigue, and some of that can be battling us?
Pillows, a walk or a run. It used to be a run, but I'm too old now. And substance management, and I mean that in terms of coffee and or alcohol, right? Because you got to be really careful about, I'll start with managing coffee and alcohol. You got to be really careful about the habits that you have and also potentially deliberate. Like if I land and it's still AM wherever I land, but maybe it's midnight in New York, I've got to smash a coffee because you've got to start to accelerate the reset of your rhythms, right? And there's a lot, you can go to Huberman to read, hear all sorts of stuff on that, right? So managing your daily rhythms and the wake sleep cycle. Two, one of the best ways to do that is to run, like getting exercise, particularly in the morning, so that your body knows this is go time. And then three, until I started bringing my own pillow, I didn't know, depending on the quality of the hotel you end up in, some of the hotels have good firm pillows, which is what I need because I've got a 6'6" frame and my head is a long way from the edge of my shoulder. But funnily enough, five-star hotels have the worst pillows, in my opinion. They're just like sacks of clothes thrown in. So eventually I started packing my own when I could, and it was an absolute game changer. Like I was like, oh my God, I feel like I can actually sleep a good solid 5 hours at least, which compared to when you're rustling with a pillow you don't like and you're in a bed you don't know and your body clock's off, like it's a bad place to be at 4 a.m. in the morning. So they're my three easiest hacks.
Solid. I had that pillow incident about a week ago, so I'm gonna have to try bringing my own pillow. Last question. What in working with high performance and all the work you do, what brings you the most joy in what you get to do?
Great question. The easiest answer is to say winning, but I'm so far removed from that end result now. Like when you play, you have some impact on it. When you coach, you have more impact, but 1 degree removed. And when you're in my position as a consultant, coach, advisor, depending on where you are and who you are, advising in the hierarchy, it's a few degrees removed from the actual result. But it was quite enjoyable to be on a ticker tape parade with New York Liberty going up Broadway when they had a practice run for the Knicks parade effectively a year before Liberty won. And I remember being on the bus and turning to the GM and being like, man, imagine if the Knicks ever win, this place will burn. There was 200,000 people. They blocked off Wall Street for the women's basketball team. It was amazing. And, so moments like that are fantastic. I remember when we progressed in Qatar with the men's football team at a World Cup, which is huge for Australia as a team I was with. That was one of the most satisfying, and kind of like sit there and just be like, wow, I just did something that maybe one other person in my position has done before with this team. Yeah. So those things are great, but they're so few and far between that, you got to grab the wins and farm the wins where you can. And to me, that is something that I didn't notice that I missed. I skipped over a little period of my history. I was a physical therapist between playing and coaching for about 4 years. Mm-hmm. And someone asked me at one point, what do you miss most from that? And my answer was kind of similar to even just being a position coach, is that I could guarantee you that every week there would be at least 1, 2, 3, 5, depending on how good the week was, patients or players who would turn and say, thank you. They would literally walk out of the room in a better place than when they came in, physically and or mentally. And that is such an underrated thing to just know I helped someone. That person knows that I helped them, and they're in a better place having walked in 20 minutes ago and feeling like shit. And so, to me, that is the most enjoyable part, is when someone realizes that what we're doing actually has shifted them, and that they're actually grateful enough to be like, hey, thank you. That was, it's not a position, it's not a role that gets a lot of thanks, partly because it's sort of hidden in the background, and most of the people who do this job aren't searching for stardom, right? If they were, they would pick a different job. But that to me is the number one reward, is when you actually know you've helped someone and they thank you for it.
Well, Paddy, I appreciate you and thank you for your patience with me bugging you and getting you on here. This was fantastic. It was great to hear and learn from you and have this opportunity. So greatly appreciate you.
No problem, man. I appreciate you, and you don't need to apologize. Like I said, it's a good characteristic to have. So it was a great chat.
Good. I'm glad.